Lots of people ask me, Fish, what decks are good in Tiny? And I've always given the same answer. I don't know. But over in the Discord, link in the description, we've been running our monthly leagues for quite a while now, and I think I can finally give a better answer than that. I can't tell you what the best decks are, I can only tell you what decks have found some success so far. And let me be clear, this is not a tier list. This is not a complete list of every viable thing in Tiny. These are just some ideas to get you started so you have a better idea of what to expect when you're going in. First up, something simple, red deck wins. There's a reason we call it that, y'all. Right now, there's some debate on what people are putting in the zone, the big two being between Lelia and Ragavan. I personally prefer Ragavan. I think giving the deck the ability to always have the best possible turn 1 gives the deck so much consistency, I couldn't really imagine not doing it. We all know how good the Silly Monkey is, and when you make your opponent have the turn 1 or 2 answer every single game, the fact of the matter is they aren't going to have it every single game. However, if you'd like to give up some consistency for a higher power ceiling, then Lelia is your Spirit Warrior. This card has some absolutely absurd words on it. She's the complete package. It gets bigger every turn, sometimes by leaps, it draws cards, it's going to fuel the red deck wins engine by itself. If you can power her out with a City of Traders or an Ancient Tomb, the game might just end before your opponent can ever get their legs under them. Either way you go, I don't see the red deck going anywhere. Next up, Esper Control. Esper Control has been a tier 1 deck in Tiny for about 10 years now, and I think it'll take a lot to change that. Way back in the day, it was Marika, but these days it's Aminato or Dakon or still Marika, honestly. These decks are usually pretty standard stuff. Light on actual win conditions, high on removal. Tiny by nature makes the question of ending the game a complicated one because you lack those huge game-ending haymakers. Esper Control seeks to leverage that and make the question as complicated as possible, eliminating any possibility to kill them before eventually beating down with a single protected threat. Aminato has proven itself by winning the January League and getting top 4 in another. Resetting out of time every single turn has proven to be a play pattern that is very, very hard to beat. Our third archetype is lands in all its many forms. When we changed over to 20 life, this deck instantly became one of the better things you can do. Because it turns out, doesn't matter what format you're playing, if you can put Merit Lage into play, you should put Merit Lage into play. Obviously, this deck is super nerfed by the singleton rule, but it still puts up a lot of consistent results, mostly off the back of Life from the Loam. I've seen people do lots of permutations of this, Azusa, Thrasios Jessica, Leovold, Anafenza. It doesn't really matter as long as you're in green and you remember to put the Crop Rot in your deck. You can pick how committed you want to be to being a lands deck, but I'd put the base as Dark Depths combo. And then if you want to include Feel the Dead or Glacial Chasm, then you go a little bit deeper. And I think there's still some unexplored space to be found with Punishing Fire. Next up is Tempo. The children yearn for the blue-red spells deck. For years and years and years, I made fun of this archetype because it was the classic bait deck. You're looking through Scryfall and you're like, oh hell yeah, I'm gonna build Delver with Jory. And then you'd play one game and you'd realize the deck has absolutely no way to win the game once they kill your Swift Spear. But that was then, this is now. In the last few years, they've printed an absolute deluge of cards for the blue-red base Tempo deck. Like Shredder and EI and Fable, they've single-handedly brought this from being a meme to being a very reasonable threat. You can add a tertiary color to add some spice to your life, and you get to play more cards than your opponent, so that's always fun, even when you're not winning. Our fifth and final pillar is good stuff, aka piles. One of the quirks of a singleton format is that it turns out if you just run all the best cards in your colors, you're gonna end up with a reasonable deck. Piles can be any number of colors and could be any archetype. It's really more of a deck building philosophy than an actual strategy, but piles are really a beast of their own and they will demand some respect. I'm mostly just bringing it up in case you're worried about deck building, because it doesn't need to be complicated if you don't want it to be. But let's get out of archetypes and talk about some specific commanders. First off, Gearson Starn. I cannot believe this is a real Magic card. Why does it have Ward? Why does it have Ward? The gimmick is really straightforward. You turn all your 1s into 3s and opponent dies. But being straightforward doesn't mean it's easy to deal with. Gearson's Ward ability makes his clock often just 1 turn sooner than an opponent can reasonably stabilize. Removal feels really bad against this deck because no one is ever excited to blow and eliminate on a Cloud of Fairies, but they kinda have to if they want to have any hope of winning. and you would not believe how explosive this deck can be. Opponent is dead before they even know it. Grape Shot is lethal through interaction on like turn 4. A deck that really blew me away recently is Zulazau's Marath Landfall Zoo deck. This deck went 4-0 and finished first place in the March League. It also won my heart. Marath is a very strong leader that somewhat lacked things to actually do for a long time, but finding the open lane into the Zoo deck is exactly what it was looking for. The most interesting thing about this deck specifically is the Kahira companion. This deck was brewed basically just as a thought experiment to find a place for Kahira, and this came out. Forfeiting a few choice creatures for Kahira is not a choice I would have had the courage to make, but that being said, it doesn't seem to be missing out on much by sticking to this deck building restriction. Creatures in Tiny are typically, well, small in nature, so using the landfall abilities of zoo creatures to bump up above others and attack effectively is a very smart way of working around the limits of the format. And the last deck I want to highlight is Kotkon's Tyvar deck. Azuri Elves was the second deck I ever built in Tiny Leaders, so I'm a little bit biased here, but she finished second in the March League, so earned a spot here. In the past, your best bet with Elves was Azuri because it was convenient to have your win condition in the command zone, but Tyvar is the best thing to ever happen to this deck. Not just because his abilities are absolutely absurd, and they are, but also because he lets you run Profane Command! Those chumps over in Legacy have it so easy. Being able to natural order for Crater Hoof Behemoth is a luxury that we are not afforded in Tiny Leaders, so we gotta do this the old-fashioned way and just beat him over the head really hard. Or sometimes you end on Staff of Domination. Or sometimes Azuri does his Crater Hoof impression anyway. This deck is completely giving up any illusions of interaction and just going all in on getting your opponent dead. Go, 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 and whatever is happening across the table from you is not important. And that's going to be the end of this meta snapshot video. If you'd like more meta recaps like this, let me know. And don't forget, you can come join the Discords. If you'd like to learn more about Tiny or join our monthly leagues, we've got a super cool, inclusive community, and we'd love to have you.